Good, thank you for catching it. Is it going?
Wait for it.
Oh, wait for it. Wait for it.
Yep.
Here we go. Okay. Then visual design critique, like I said, all of this week. I don't have time today. We're going to be lecturing today, but as well tomorrow, Tuesday, I have between 1 and 3 p.m. ish, 1, 3 p.m., 3:15 or so, and then at 6 o'clock I get out of class, and between 6 and 8 o'clock, unless students drag me off to get tacos, right? Which can happen, but it's happened in the past. But I will make you guys more important than tacos, I swear, right? And I will do critiques for you. But like I said, Wednesday in class we'll do that. And if you haven't done your critique and you get your visual designs in by the end of the week, but you still want to have your critique during week 9, right? It'll be a little bit late, but whatever. Better late than never. Better getting a grade that's marked down a little bit than not a grade at all, right? Next week then will be Memorial Day. So that Monday apparently is Memorial Day, so there will be no class. We will not have lecture. That Wednesday, then I will go over that lecture. So today we're going to go over building an HTML template for Master Arts, page layout for your web page, visual design for your web page in terms of how to incorporate said visual design into your web page, right? Convert a 960 grid website layout to responsive design, make your website responsive. In other words, those lectures that I am pointing to, this one, the building an HTML template from Master Arts, is the original lecture from this class. There's a lot of good stuff in there, primarily because I wrote it. Right? Thank you. No, that was a slow clap moment. No, that was a slow clap.
Okay.
That was totally appropriate slow clap. But it is a touch out of date. So we're going to talk what the important stuff is in here, and then where it is out of date. But there is also then the class that I teach up at UW. That is basically a compressed Web 110, Web 120 type environment. HTML, CSS, like PHP, like JavaScript environment. In other words, if you want Mike's and Kula's roadmap in terms of how do I build that website that Mike wants me to build in that WEB200 class, right? How many of you have thought that to yourself? Be honest, Aaron, you have, right? A good roadmap to follow then would be the lecture series, the lecture size series, as I like to call it. The exercises here from my HCD 532 class. So we'll start talking about page layout, how to integrate your visual design. We'll talk about a little bit of JavaScript and how to make your website responsive today, right? And then next week, we will go into multiple pages for your website, maybe a contact form for your website in terms of like how do you break things into includes and write very light PHP conditional statements to then say, hey, if I'm on this page, make the navigation item highlighted because that's the you are here state, right? Makes sense? So we'll go over that kind of stuff. But one way, shape, or form, this lecture series, this lecture size series is a good roadmap. As well, the last time I taught this class, I recorded the video series. So if you'd like some support materials on this kind of stuff, you should maybe possibly take a look at the video series that goes along with that class as well. But getting back to what we should be talking about. Then we'll talk about as well one of the ways that then I've been updating my lectures or support materials for a lot of the lectures that I wrote way back when, like the original one for this class, was also I started writing blog postings on my business website specifically for this class. So when how many of you use the 960 grid for your website here? Great. So what I'm going to talk about today then is, so what if you had that pixel perfect static 960 grid? And when I say static, I mean, well, non-responsive in this case. Static can mean so many different things, but let's say non-responsive. How do you then go from that you've then laid everything out with this 960 grid, how do you make it then enter a world where it will respond? Okay, so we'll go over the how to then put the sidebar down at the bottom, so on and so forth. Okay, but let's start today, as if we haven't already started today, but let's go back to then this building an HTML template from MasterArt. Okay, so let's talk about the pros and cons of this lecture, or where we've come from in this lecture. So again, if you're like me, you've used Adobe Illustrator, right? Most of you guys have been using Adobe Illustrator. Mm-hmm. Now, at this point in time, when I did this was back in the day of, well, you then opened it up in Photoshop, you then needed some background. Clearly, if you needed background files then that had gradients in them and drop shadows, back in the day, you know, even 4 years ago, 3-4 years ago, drop shadows and gradients were not widely supported in the browser world. So if you had gradients and drop shadows, what you needed to do was make images for your backgrounds. Okay, so if I then looked at this demo right here, this background then, if I can grab it, come on. Yeah, let's inspect it. You can kind of see it here. That background then was all the way across the top. Shadows in it as well. The same thing with the navigation. If we looked at this, you would see that we had, you can kind of see it here when I roll over, that one navigation bar. If we then had in the middle, right, we then, you can't really see it, but you might see these two little dots right there that are the drop shadow that then repeats, okay? So how I have always built my sites, and here I'm going to do a new experiment, and I'm going to try to turn this camera on and draw something on the board. Yeah. Dude, I'm going so crazy.
You're getting fancy.
Getting fancy schmancy. Do I need to turn that one on?
Is it plugged in?
It's plugged in.
Did you turn it on?
I just did. Thanks, Dad.
It says no camera.
Yeah, how about this?
Yes, camera.
Where does it say no camera?
See, it's got the camera slash at the top.
Oh. Oh.
Okay, is the camera off?
Do it, do it, do it, do it.
Here it is. I
How about this? Let's
It's
use,
probably off when it's showing your logo.
Yeah.
It's probably off.
let's go back here.
What about the blue camera? Yeah, the blue on the side.
Let's do this. Share. I know if I turn this off, it should go to this camera.
Maybe hit the red camera thing again? You might have it on.
Yeah. Do it, do it, do
What
it.
about the blue icon on the side, Mike?
This right here?
The
Yeah,
blue,
that's-
no, the
third
blue,
one,
the
third one
camera
down.
shape.
Yeah, that's the little camera in there.
Oh.
There we go.
Ah!
Ha 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 ha.
Ooh,
Camera
Oh, it's-
lens thing.
This
Yeah,
is so cool.
yeah.
It's just a little piece of plastic.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, very good. So basically then, how I have always built my sites is from a desktop perspective, right? So if we remember in terms of, what?
Oh, it's mirroring your actions?
Yeah, but when you watch it back, we've already, yeah, I did the same thing too, where when you watch it back, it's not mirrored.
Okay.
Right, so it'll actually, so when we've been doing our, again, if you were using the 960 grid, right? So you could say this is 960 pixels, or in the case of what I do on the outsides, I do 20 pixels out here on the outsides. So instead of 960 with 10 on the outsides, I do 20, so it makes it into 980. But in a typical desktop layout, right? What I have seen a lot of people do is do an overall page wrapper, right? Or let's go back to the screen. This is the first time, Steve, that I'm toggling between this and screen, so you're my test group here, right?
It should have something to make it easier.
That's all right. This is easy enough. If I can point that there and then toggle back and forth, that's great. So as some of you saw me, I had this this drawing up on the projector earlier. And Rose, was that you that said something about the PDF? Yeah. I do not have the PDF in my examples folder. That's not what you're seeing here. Okay. So what I've seen students do then in the past is for a desktop type environment like this, then they've done that div ID page, right? Or what I consider to be the page wrapper, right? And then they'll do a header. And don't worry, those of you at home that are watching this, I am drawing up on the board, and I will come back to what's on the board. Might have a navigation here, right? And then when it comes to the content area and the sidebar area, right? And then the footer. This is what I consider, as much as I like ducking, this is what I consider to be a broken page, right? Because nowadays, if we have, or let's say it like this, has anybody ever used this bucket layout like this? Okay, no? I've seen a lot of students that have used this layout, and what they've done then, and what I've noticed is, if they then have things in this navigation that are floated left, has anybody ever experienced this div, the content div, come up and float next to their navigation like that? Who's experienced that? couple of people. Okay. So let's go switch back to then the screen share. Let's go back to then the video. So if you've ever had then this float up next to here, what's the reason? What? Yeah, okay. So if this then, this right here is floated left, and this is floated right, okay, it is going to come and float out to the edges of that container, true? Okay. However, if you then have these as well floated, right, and this floated, this is going to try to come up next to that because you have not put clear on this, true? Okay. As well, what happens if you want then, in the responsive world, a website where this navigation, so if we, that ghost over there. This was the ghost that I made the other day.
Oh.
It's a cute little ghost. Okay.
Mhm.
So if we want then our navigation to come all the way out to, let's say, not 1280. $1920, right? We then have to make this page wrapper go on the outside of that, right? Is everybody following this logic? What happens to these then? They float all the way over here. Okay? It's not what we want to have happen. Instead, I am then of the philosophy of a different build. Without, actually, I don't want to say without the page wrapper. I use more of them, but I don't call it a page wrapper. Have you ever heard the term container div?
Yes.
What is a container div? What's its purpose?
To hold the content.
To what?
To hold the content?
What'd you say?
Contain the element.
Contain the elements? I heard somebody say float. Who said it? Steve, was that you?
Yeah.
You sure?
I'm sure.
Okay. Say contain the floats. Just say it.
All right, contain the flow.
Right answer. Correct answer. Okay. So if then we have a header we possibly have a navigation. And this is where we'll now start to get into my terminology or my labeling system. How many of you have ever seen my labeling system where I then have, instead of an overall container, I am specifically worried about these two floated elements. So if this one is content, and this one is sidebar, right? If and when this design stretches out to 1920, we then have what I typically label middle. Has anybody ever seen my label called middle? Right? Yeah, you have. In the HCD stuff, you will see that I have this labeled content, this labeled text, and this labeled sidebar. Whatever, different labels. I really wish I would have gone with this labeling system consistently through HCD 532. I blew it and I've stuck with it and I've had you'll see what I'm talking about.
Why is middle better than content? Why do you wish you'd said that?
So that I would have a consistent labeling system for myself and my demos all the way around. Just for my own consistency. Doesn't matter what you call it, as long as you're consistent with yourself and you understand it.
Okay.
Right. But for me, I have this labeled content in one demo and this labeled content in another demo. That's what I wish I would have done. Okay. So now, if this is expanded out to 1920, then these two elements are kept in their place. Because at a desktop resolution, right, you rarely see the content area go out full width. You might see the content area or the middle area or whatever you want to call it go out to about 1200 or so, max. Everybody know what I'm talking about, right? But what does go full width of the page, typically? I heard the answer. Somebody say it a little bit louder. Who said it? Headers and footers and nav bars. Okay, so what I'm going to show you in a few minutes then is this layout that I use over and over and over again, where if I need then a piece of color, like the navigation, to come all the way out to the edge. Now, if the header is just white, I can just leave this there, right? Okay. How would I get then this header to sit in the center of the screen? Put it in a div.
Zero item.
Who said put it in a div? That's the first step, Seth. Thank you very much. Or an element, whether you want to put it in a header element, doesn't matter. I would say the next step is then to label it appropriately, right? I heard margin what? Zero auto. Or L25 auto, 50 auto, whatever. The key thing is margin left and right auto. So margin right auto, margin left auto. You could write it, yeah, you could write it margin zero auto, right? But if you needed your top and bottom to be a little bit different, right? Again, however you want to write it, but essentially, yeah, right and left auto, okay? So same thing with then the nav here. We would then typically want our navigation elements to sit in the center as well. But what if we then want a color to come all the way out? Well, that's where then we can make a nav container around it. And by default, if we said this right here was width 980, right? Max width 980, and then margin zero auto, it's going to stay in the center all the way out to 980, right? If we just put a div tag around this element or any element around it, a block level element, that element is then going to, by nature of being a block level element, come all the way out, and we can apply a color to it. Same thing with the footer, right? If we want the footer to do the same thing, because this is a common look at desktop. Would you not say, correct? Right? Just about every website you ever see now is pretty much this at desktop. And then when it goes down to mobile, you take the sidebar and you move it underneath there. Or you take bits and pieces from the sidebar and integrate it into this content area, however you want to, right? So if you wanted things to then, in a responsive world, if you wanted this to go there and that to go there, you could. You could stack them as they are in the markup, right? If you mark things up, right? So if you stacked them in the code, 1, 2, 3, 4, you could float 1 left, float 2 right, float 3 left, float 4 right. And at desktop, they'll all do that, right? If you wanted then just like what we had originally, I have my content area, I have my sidebar, and content area gets floated left and sidebar gets floated right. It'll do so. Then at a resolution of your choosing, then you can snap the sidebar underneath. Give it immediate query. Okay. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take, so this is the premise of my build. Is that pretty relatively clear-ish? Okay. So where is that build? Where can you find that build? You certainly can't find it in my examples folder where that Ducket PDF is. But if we then go to this next one, page layout for your web page. Here's this build, okay, to the 960 or 980 CUDA system, where I have a header, I have a navigation, I have a middle, I have a content area, I have a sidebar. I have a footer down below, okay? Code. Oh, that's right. I have to download the whole repository, not just a folder. It's hard out there for an instructor. If you want to see all my code for my 598 stuff, you can download it or just look at it on GitHub, right? But if I go, actually it used to be 598, now it's 532. I know, confusing. Page layout for your web page. So if I then open this, brackets, right? And then, oops. Stop. Open. I can't just drag it over the Chrome icon, can I? I have to go to Chrome and then open it. Come talk. Yeah, come talk.
I find it you on Facebook.
Good, fantastic. It's a good way of going about things. Come on. Isn't there just an easy open thing? I'm so PC allergic. You're not going to have to, oh my God, seriously. Not in. Okay. So if I open this here, right, and then I go back to brackets, what I was talking about was, here's how I mark this up. begin header, begin navigation, content, text. Notice, so anybody in Web 170 with me in this classroom? Okay. Have you guys noticed my commenting system? Right? I always organize my code in such a manner where I don't care if it looks redundant. I tell you the beginning of this element. I tell you where the end of this element is. How many of you have ever played the game, what does that closing div tag belong to? Right? This is why I do this, okay? Because there's nothing like, seriously, coming down here and being like, where's the opening? Now, in this case, I've used article, right? I also, if I have nested elements, meaning the text, and this is where I had content instead of middle, Mary, right? And this is where I have text instead of content, and then sidebar over here, right? But what I do is then I will push these over. I will tab these elements over if they're nested like that. As well, with my CSS, I will do then general first and foremost, star selector, CSS reset, margin and padding 0, okay? Always don't forget to reset your CSS like that. Then I'll say my body tag, I'll say some of my H tags, et cetera, But then I will get into the major elements, header, navigation. If I have a UL inside the navigation, I'll tab it over, right? To delineate, to say to me visually, that's inside that other element. Same thing. Content, text, it's inside, it's pushed over a little bit. So let's say then, what I don't have right now is, you don't see then how in space this column and that column live. So background color just for whatever. 2, 3. So if we save that, you refresh it. Background color, index, page layout. Let's make sure I've opened the right file. Might have opened the unextracted one. How many of you ever done that? Why are there 2 folders? Why can I get into the extracted one and open files? I don't understand it. Open with Chrome. There we go. Yay, stuff works. I was wondering why my background wasn't showing up too, right? So if I then put a background behind those, you can also see then that they are sitting exactly on those grid lines. So again, those grid lines, 60 pixels for columns, 20 pixel for gutter, 20 pixel left and right. Now, I would also like to add, right now, I'm using the default box model, okay? What I mean by the default box model is, how many of you know what I'm talking about by the default box model? Okay, so if we're talking default box model, if I have this content area, why is it 940 pixels if I want it to be 980 pixels visually wide? Because I have padding left and right 20. How many of you have seen this box model? Box sizing border box model. Who knows what that does? This is the new box model that both Foundation and Bootstrap work upon. Meaning, if I save that as that box model, right? Because I say 940 width, it has taken the 20 pixels off the left and right, because that box model allows you to have padding and borders on the inside of the sizing, right? So when you have images, so those of you that are in my WEB200 class, and we're talking this image right here, if and when it comes and needs to collapse in, right? And I don't have the responsive working properly on that demo. I'll show you another demo here in a second. But if I want to say max width, 100%, but I have padding and a border, this padding and border get added on to that 100%. So it is then actually 100 and something %, and it'll throw off your responsive stuff. Does that make any sense to anybody? Okay. So what I've started doing then is I'm still leery of changing my box model everywhere to box sizing border box. In other words, I take it off the content and I put it it is going to take the padding off the inside of the box model, right? So that if I say this is 940 width, the padding is in here and the border is on the inside. Thereby, that sidebar is just doesn't have the room and goes down underneath. So what I've started doing is if we go to this Make Your Websites Responsive one that we're going to look here in a second. If and when we then get to here, I don't know if I have a photo in here anywhere. I don't. If and when we get into then it being responsive like that, then what I typically do is, and I'll show you on my, let's open up this one. So if, like on these images right here, where I have padding and I have a border, that image then, I've said box sizing border box. Then I have a border 2 pixel and 5 pixel padding that goes on the inside, right? So I can say all images are a max width of 100%, because if I took this off, watch the image, it's now 100 and something %. Well, that gets really annoying when you're trying to calculate responsive stuff. Like back when back in my day, before I knew about box model, box sizing border box, I had to take all this padding and these borders and calculate the individual percentages for this grid so that it would do this successfully. And it was a pain in the you know what. And then I can't remember who showed me box sizing. It might have been Thomas. I might have discovered it on my own. I might have discovered it through Bootstrap or whatever. But that's how then you can make those be those percentages. Right? Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay. Very, very important concept. So what I typically do then is if I'm going to put images in my I might do a universal image tag. How do you spell height? Right? So that it'll flip the box model. All images will be 100% of their container and size proportionately. Right? Okay. So we'll get to that in a few more minutes in the responsive stuff. Let's get back to the drawing on the board. Right? So if I then want to open up 3 instances of Google Chrome. Apparently PCs will allow you to do that. It's fun. See you later, Ducket. But at least you guys know where it is. I didn't show it to you. Let's save that. Look it out of there. So if I want then a navigation bar, like in the drawing previously, that those of you that are here in class can still see on the whiteboard, and those of you that are not here in class or watching it on the video, you should what?
In class?
Come to class. That's all I'm saying. Thank you, Star. You're such a great audience member. Love it. Okay, but what if I wanted that navigation to go all the way out to the edges? Well, I could simply do this. One of the things I don't like about brackets, maybe it's a setting.
Mm-hmm.
I don't like that. I can turn that off, can't I? I can.
Mhm.
We'll do that later.
You're using brackets?
I am. You know why? Because I'm not FTPing anything.
Fair.
Yeah, yeah.
Fair.
So if then I wanted a piece of color to go around my navigation, that's all I have to do right there, right? Well, that's not all I have to do, but that block level element then is actually going all the way out to the edges of the browser. So if I then said, okay, well, let's go by the naming convention that Mike just put up on the board. And I just call it navigation container, right? Still getting used to brackets. So used to just Dreamweaver, the idiosyncrasy is a Dreamweaver, that getting to another coding tool, I'm like, oh yeah, it does this here, it does that there. One of the things that I like to do, and you've seen this if you're in my WordPress class, is I like to put pink borders around things. Why? They look pretty, right? But also they're functional. I can see then that I now have a navigation bar that goes all the way out to the edge, right? But because my navigation div that I started out with is still, right? And one of the things that when you used to do an overall page wrapper, that I used to call page crapper sometimes, right? But if you did an overall page wrapper, that's where a lot of people did the margin zero auto fixed width on it, right? Which, if you do it individually on these individual elements, in other words, give it a width, give it the margin auto, then if you do put something around it, like an outer, some of you are maybe familiar with the inner and outer concept. Who's familiar with that? Same concept. This is exactly what I'm doing. And if I wanted a navigation bar that the navigation still sat in the middle of the page like that, I'll just use black and white to demonstrate. Eyes are done. How many of you are looking at this right here? Prevents the Great Collapse and wondering what to yourself, what is the Great Collapse? We'll go over that in a minute. But if I then go back here, well, LIA, color, that's black. No wonder I can't see it. Why did not any of you catch me on that? Same thing with the footer, right? I've got my, oops, I have my footer centered like that. Yeah, that's awesome. I have to turn that setting off, Seth. It's going to get annoying. I'm looking for that extra down at the bottom. If anybody's wondering. Footer container, P tag. Navigation padding, content, footer, padding. Where is it? Well, not to worry about it. But this is where then, if you wanted this type of thing, right, you could have essentially wait for it. Who's sick of it yet? And I keep on typing .com because then it'll go to .org. It's fun. It's a game I play. So that's how then this is done for that color. Right? This white area is the content or the middle area. Right? I also do to get this to kind of stick out over top of it. -60. Just sneak it up underneath, right? Okay. Almost 4 o'clock. So, in terms of, hey, Mike, great. I get that whole desktop layout thing. And I'm going to put words in your mouth because it's fun that way. And you've totally convinced me that this layout works. And maybe I should consider not doing an overall wrapper and do my elements like this. Make sense? Right? Okay. The next thing is, well, great. How do I make it responsive? How many of you are still struggling with the whole responsive layout and stuff like this?
A little bit.
Yeah? How many of you are just like, I got it. I don't need anybody to talk to me about it at all.
It depends on the situation.
Okay, so let's explain the theory of how I then go from this to there it is. That, okay? So this is where, again, desktop down, mobile first, I don't care. See, Steve, you know, how you want to do it, I don't care how you design things. To me, I don't like either desktop down or mobile first in terms of you have to do one or the other, right? So what I've always railed against mobile first stuff is, well, you're just totally discounting the desktop layout. So what I've seen from the mobile first layouts then is that a lot of times they just look like big tablet layouts on my desktop screen, right? Which then the ergonomics are off, meaning that if I'm not going to change it to, well, maybe I will. I'm a lying pants. So if we go back to the camera, we go back to my drawing, right? If you do then a mobile first layout, right, that you have maybe a spotlight image or something on the home page, you have to remember that in a phone, so let's say you're at 480 here, right? If you have a header, something right there, you have a big image like that, and then you have some text. If you carry this same thing over to (1920), you're going to have your header, your navigation, so you might then have your logo, and your navigation might come out like that, and you have a big image like this. Not saying that that doesn't look sexy. It does, right? Who was laughing? Because that was awesome. Thank you. It looks sexy as hell. It does. But what's happening is you're going from portrait to landscape. And I haven't talked to Jacob Nielsen lately, right? Or ever, but last time I read one of his books, one of his groundbreaking usability books, what it said was, if this right here looks finished, the user does not know that there's content down below. And those of you in the usability inspection methods class would flag that as a heuristic of some sort, a usability issue, right? So how many of you know what I'm talking about? You start seeing these layouts like that, and they have really nice, big, sexy text and a nice, big button, but nobody knows that there's stuff down there. And then the rest of the page looks huge, right? Does anybody remember those days where, stole the screen. Some places put an iframe with about 10 lines of text that you had to scroll inside? Who remembers those days? Right? That's what this is to me. Drives me absolutely, now that Steve's not here, although he might support my thing, absolutely ape shit. Batshit crazy, whatever you want to say. As my son would say, banana poopy. Knock, knock. Banana. Banana poopy. It's his favorite one.
Question, aren't a lot of users starting to come to expect that you'll scroll down and there'll be another big image to be
Right.
on and another, and
Yeah.
basically everything all on one page?
Sure. I'm going to say yes, users expect to scroll. And they're going to expect those big images. What I'm saying is, it has the result of this, where I start to feel like I'm looking in a magnified space. It's like if I were to, who's got a book? Who's got a book? Who's got a book?
Oh, lots of
You
books.
guys don't have a book? Okay, yeah, give me a book, give me a book. It's like if I were to do this. Right?
Yeah, tell me about it.
Sorry. But you understand what, you guys understand what I'm saying? I don't want to look at the page like this. I want to look at it out like this. I want to be able to see the whole page, not one image at a time. Does that make sense to you? Who's with me? Okay? So those are my beefs. Not saying that your sexiness isn't too sexy, or that, I mean, if you want to be sexy, great, be sexy, right? But if you want to be ergonomic and usable, you might consider not doing that to that extent, right? Or when it comes to something like this, instead of having the image all the way down like that, do it like so that the user can see that there is content down there. Does that make sense? Okay. Great. Cross that off our list. So, then what I like to promote is, we're not really promote,
No signal.
but slow clap. Yes, come on. Yeah. So I bumped the thing up here. Road hazards all over the place. So if we have a layout like this, then how do we make it responsive? Well, let's start talking about typography. And if this is review for you, that's cool, hopefully. But we have switched from fixed pixels to M's. So if I need to then have relative units, okay? What I've started doing, and you can come up with your own, how you want to do it, but the philosophy, the theories that I've started adhering to, I got from the Ethan Marcotte book, right? Everybody remembers the Ethan Marcotte book? I get bored up here, Mark, and Steve's gone, so. But.
What's that?
What happens here, right, when we, in our body tag, set font size to 100%? We are going then from fixed pixels to, or fixed units to relative units, but how most browsers interpret this is, if you say in the body tag, size 100%, then that will set all type sizes to a default 16 pixels. So that you can then create M's based off of that 16 pixels. So essentially, this 16 pixels becomes the M. Where does the term M come from?
The letter M?
Correct, more specifically.
The space that the letter M takes in.
Which is also called the, what's in my head? The bounding box. Okay, so if and when see if I can find it quickly. Hold on, I have a specific slide I want to show you. Just forget exactly what lecture it's under. Oh. The bounding box, right? The box that The bounding box then is so many units wide, okay? Also known as the M square. Right? So the bound, I don't have the bounding box of an M, but if we were to put a bounding box around a capital M, that is then the M square. The pixel size, if you will, is it in here? No. Is the height of the bounding box. So, if we then say font size 100%, we are saying that the height of the bounding box of the M square is then 16 pixels in the web width. Therefore, if we want to do the rest of our typography and switch over to M's, then we would calculate 36 divided by 16 is 2.25 units. 24 divided by 16 is 1.5 units. 18 divided by 16, you get the thing here, 1.25 units. Okay, so on and so forth. In terms of then line height or leading to type size. For body copy, what was the formula that I talked about when we did typography? 2/3, right? So therefore, what I would typically do is use a font size of 1 EM and a line height of 150. Or I could say a line height of 1.5 EM, whatever relative unit you want to use. But on H tags, I've found that when you have that much spacing and you come down to a phone size, much leading or line height in between the headline lines. So I will typically drop it to 125 or 100%, right? To then make that look nice. Why M's? I don't know. This article tells me so. Jesus loves me. This I know. The Bible tells me so.
What the article does is that?
I know, exactly. The article loves me. This I know. There is a good reason why in there, because I've always thought to myself, well, type doesn't respond. It wraps, lines wrap, so why are we using M's? I can't remember, but I read that article and it totally sold me on it. And I can't remember what it is.
Because it's relative to the size of the
Viewport. Yeah, okay. Fair enough. Step 3, make your images responsive. This is where then earlier I said on the image tag, max width 100%, height auto. This is where it also encouraged you to use that box sizing border box on your images for now. How many of you are used to the original default box model where padding and borders are on the outside of your width and you have to subtract the padding out from your width? Keep that going, right? I still do that. Why? Because all my old stuff is using the old box model that I've been updating for a long time. So if I switched everything over to box sizing and border box, I'd be in for a shitstorm of edits that I'd have to make. So I've left it, and I've just updated my images, right? Because again, on the images, you definitely want your images to have the padding and the borders on the inside so that your images then are at 100 and something %, right? Okay. Step 4, make your layout responsive. So this is where then, if I have my main elements, and this is where, again, Mary, I wish this would have said middle. but I'm stuck with it. Okay? So my main elements that go all the way out, or stackable elements if you want to say in space, header, navigation, content, footer, or header, navigation, middle, footer, whatever you want to say. This is where instead of saying width 980 or 940, you're going to need to change it to a max width. Why?
The screens go all bigger than that.
Well,
You want to stop so that it'll just.
right. Does that make sense? Smaller than 980. If we said width 980, then that fixed width would be out past our viewport, right? So if we said width 980, then we'd have a header that extended all the way out there. By saying max width, that element then conforms to the viewport, okay? So what I typically do, and again, this is my style of doing stuff, right? Other people have their own styles. Do what suits you, okay? So if we do that, we should then see our outer elements like that scale in responsibly, okay? Meaning that as things come in, then if that white box is max width 980, you can see it starts to scale in. And at a certain space, you then see the corner radius go away and you see the header and the navigation kind of jump over a little bit. And that in another spot, you'll see the navigation go away and the hamburger menu, the good old hamburger menu, come into play. So what's going on? Well, let's take a look at then the columns inside of that container. We've said, and I have left the containing elements to be a max width at then the immediate queries, right, down below when we start coming in. Let's go back up here. So what I'm starting to do then is, again, I go desktop down. You can criticize me all you want. I can take it. Right? Who hates me because I do desktop down? Anybody? One person? Mark? No? Not yet? Who does it too? Yeah, it's a good way to learn, you know. But again, whatever. If you want to go mobile first, you know, min widths instead of max widths, knock yourself out. I don't care, right? But what I'm doing here then, at my 980, and you have to remember, I'm a good old boy from the good old days of desktop design. And I've then have a set design. In other words, this is my set design that I go with over and over and over and over again that works for me in the design patterns that I choose to use.
From what I've seen, it kind of seems like all mobile same,
Yeah.
and desktop's better.
So it's all going to look like, this anyway. You go desktop down, it looks like that, or you go mobile first, and it looks like that. Who cares, right? To me, that's up for you to decide. How you want to live your life is none of my concern, right? If you want to run away and join the circus, Chris, you know. So I basically do then the media queries, and I choose my breakpoints. Well, my first breakpoint is then below 1024, right? And when I do that, what I have to do then to my containing or to my children elements, right, is if I have then a max width on the parent element, I then on the children elements have to do percentages of that max width. Okay, so I will leave my elements like footer at max width 980. If I have that padding in there, et cetera, et cetera. And then when it comes to the children elements, so if we're looking at the content element, okay, I've left the content element at the max width, whatever it was. And below 1024, then, as it comes in, I need to set my children elements text and sidebar to percentages. So this is where this is straight out of the Ethan Marcotte book. How many of you have read the Ethan Marcotte book that I'm talking about?
It's the yellow one, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
First responsive pregnancy test in all departments. That's not what I want. This one. So this is where I read this in a night and went, that's it, that's pretty easy. And that's where I've gotten my starting block for all my responsive stuff.
I think you guys are revised more up to date book.
Good.
Thing.
Oh, good. I'll have to take a look at that. So basically then what I need to do is, if I had, because I was doing it in a 960 world, I had my content element 620, or my text element 620, and my sidebar element 300, I would need to then convert those into percentages. True? So the math then goes 620 divided by 940, 300 divided by 940. Wait a second. If my content is 980, why am I dividing 300 by 940 and 620 by 940 and not 980?
It's like,
Here's the math. Because there's the padding out here. We can make that into a percentage if we want, or leave it at a fixed pixel, whatever. But the actual live area, if you will, then is 940, because we took the padding off the sides. So therefore, it is 620 divided by 940 equals 6595. 300 divided by 940, 3191. When I first was learning how to do this, I double checked that and double checked that and double checked that, because myself too, I was like, wait a second, why don't you take that out of 980? That's not right, it's with 980. Right? Again, if we were to reverse the box model, so I double checked that, and as far as I could tell, this was correct, and I ran with it because I'm usually right. Right? And then somebody said, you know, Linda said the same thing. And I went, great, Linda is validated. Thank you, Linda. So if you want to then take this 20 pixel padding and change that into a percentage, you can then do 20 divided by 980, and that's 204. Is this making sense? Is this what you guys, right? Okay. And then typically what I'll do is at 800 below and below, that's where then a lot of times I change to tablet view, one column, toggle menu, right? Because of there is, well, of course, the iPad and portrait is 768. But there is then a Samsung something that is 800 pixels wide, right? So typically now, my pattern is at 800 pixels, switch it to one column like that. And as well, then, if there was stuff in the sidebar, where does it go? This is where then I typically will take that side. This is why I've switched the sidebar to being on the right-hand side versus your sub-navigation. Remember how days gone by, business websites, you can see your sub-navigation on the left-hand side? Once blogs started coming out, you started seeing the sidebar moving to the right-hand side because we read from left to right and we wanted to read. Then when responsive came out, it doubled down on that and said, well, sidebar is going to the content. Well, if that is in the code, first and the sidebar second, all you have to do to get the sidebar to snap underneath is what? Remove the floats. That's it. Then they will be block level elements that your content will be on top and your site will be on bottom. Now, you're going to have to then, when you get rid of those floats, also go and make your children elements, in this case text and sidebar, float none, and a width back out to 100%, and not a percentage of its parent. Right? Pretty easy so far? Okay. Now, what about that goddamn toggle menu? Yeah. In other words,
We have to use JavaScript, don't we?
yes. So, what's going on here?
You have script that you link in a separate document.
Yeah. It's one command to start out with. Right? So if I went back to if this one works. Yes. Thank you. Okay. So, what's happening? On click, show it. On click, you hide it. How many of you have taken JavaScript? Huh?
In the middle of it.
You're in the middle of it. Let's talk about it. You want to talk more JavaScript? Let's talk more JavaScript, man. Solidarity, brother. Am I back on screen sharing? I am. Good. Okay. Here's what's happening. This is native JavaScript. You love it. You love it. This is your moneymaker right here.
I hate money.
You hate Let's break this down. If the display is open, if this menu is open, on click, hide it. In other words, if it's block, on click, set it to none. Else, if it's set to none, on click, set it to block. Okay? Does that make sense? You're with me so far? Not there yet. I'll show you. Just wrap that concept in your head. Store that in your head. Open it. If it's open, close it. Remember, programming. What is programming? Say it. Say the cliche. Say it.
Recipes.
No. Say it. Say it. Say it. Say it. Say it. It's a set of instructions. You have to give the computer instructions for everything, right? If developer's wife, who knows where this is going, or developer's husband,
Oh, the eggs.
right? How many? What does he come back with? A dozen loaves of bread. In other words, developer goes to buy milk, a loaf of bread, and his wife says, or her husband says, pick your whatever. If they have eggs, buy a dozen. She comes home with a dozen loaves of bread. What happened? You hate this joke.
You gave him the wrong instructions.
Gave him not detailed enough instructions. That's if it's open, close it. Else, open it. This menu dot display block. This menu dot display none. This menu display block. So this menu is being stored as a variable, right? So this essentially is a variable. I should say var right here, but in old school JavaScript, it was common just not to say var. You knew it was a variable. Okay? So this menu equals document dot get element by ID dot style. So to answer your question, Gordon, if I then click on assignments, did you see what it did here? Watch what it's doing there. Display none, display block. Display none, display block. As an inline style to the element. This element's name is assignment links. Use the style attribute to say none or block. Whatever element, get element by ID in the document. Okay, so this function then, what we're doing is saying, we're naming a function called sliding menu. We're then giving it a parameter, object ID. That parameter then is being passed through as whatever parameter you say is the object ID. Assignment links, lecture links. sausage links. I was trying to come up with a joke. That took a little while. Sorry, Rose. They're not all that good. Not all of them are good. I try very hard. So therefore, back in the old days, in the code like this, what we used to do is on click. So if I click the link for lectures, the old way is passing an event handler through the markup like this. Does anybody remember JavaScript back in these days? Does your JavaScript class show you that at all?
Yes.
They do? And they tell you don't do it that way. Correct. Good answer. So, on click of lecture links, access the function sliding menu and pass the arguments of lecture links, which is this object's ID. On click, grab this object ID, and if it is well, assignment links, lecture links, either or. If it is block, none. If it is none, make it display block. That is the foundation of a toggle menu, right there. That's what's happening when this is happening. Except when this is happening, let's take a look at then jQuery, right? Because jQuery, what jQuery does is, let's say it like this. That toggle menu that was handwritten, if else function, right? How many people were trying to do the same thing? 11 billion probably. Easy next step. Take that function and put it in a library that then developers can access that function, also known as jQuery. That's what jQuery is. It is a library of JavaScript, of set functions like that, okay? So, did that, walking through that JavaScript make sense, right? That's the foundation of it. Did that make sense? If I walk you through it again, you'd start to see it, okay? Slide toggle. Slide toggle is being accessed from
Down at the bottom.
let's see, where do I have it? Where do I have it? I think I have my scripts above my head tag here, start scripts. jQuery. Slide toggle is in this jQuery file somewhere. Then, in your code, sorry, link to that jQuery file, you can access that jQuery file. Slide toggle is in there. So instead of having to handwrite out a function for everything, you have preset functions like slide toggle. So I'm using that function slide toggle. Sexy slide button. One is just straight up, that will do it without the sliding. Toggle, on click, call the function, or call an anonymous function that you go access the ID of navigation and slide toggle it. So what's happening? div ID toggle. On click, see how my navigation is set to display none right now. Because of my CSS, I've set it to display none. Actually, sorry, we've been clicking it, so if I refresh it, navigation doesn't have anything on it right now. But when I click on the ID of toggle, meaning this, it now says display block. If none, display block. If block, display none. What does the dollar sign mean? Yes. In this instance, what does it mean? Remember in the last one where we said get element by ID? Get element by ID toggle. On click of toggle, make an anonymous function or call an anonymous function that accesses the ID of navigation. And if it's none, make it block. If it's block, make it none. So, everybody understand that?
Mm-hmm.
So at the root of this function is that toggle. There's more to it. You have to add more instructions as more cases come along, right? Well, let's just say it like this. So at the root of it is that dollar sign, that means jQuery, can also get the element of window. Not get element by ID, get element by class name, but get the element, which is window. When the window is loaded, allow this functionality to take place. So how many of you know what an anonymous function is? Okay. That's how you set functions on a lot of events like that. You say anonymous function, and this function actually does this. Okay. So when the window is loaded, enable me to, when I click on toggle, make another anonymous function that opens or closes that navigation element. That's a toggle menu. Okay, so there's the idea of navigation. In the header, I have the image for toggle. It opens and closes. But what if I do this and uh-oh, where did my navigation go? What happened? Still set to display none. Don't tell them this. I count on this to be broken. I swear I will not tell.
Swear I will not tell.
Thank you, Nico. Navigation. It's open. It's closed. Well, the likelihood of people doing this, right? But that is a bug. What is that? How do we fix that bug?
Need another instruction.
Correct. We need another instruction. What's the instruction?
Show up.
When?
Window size is.
Yes.
Over.
When the window resizes to over a certain point. Very important to make that distinction. If, so here's window dot resize function, more instructions. If on resize the window inner width is less than 801, take navigation and hide it. Else, if it's more than 801, when it's resized, show it. Show it. Now, then there's a bug in iOS 8. In iOS 8, when you click on a navigation and then you start to scroll up the screen, the view, the window, inner width, inner height changes. So we have to then change this only when the width changes, not the height. So what we can do is say, make a variable, call it load width. That equals window.innerWidth. Save the window load as a variable. If the load width is not equal to window.winnerWidth, trigger for width only, in other words. Check to see if it's the width that is triggering, not the height. And if it is the width that is changing, hide or show. 2 rudimentary instructions. Show and hide on click. On window resize, show and hide. Did that help explain JavaScript to you a little bit better?
Well, I mean,
It actually does make a little more sense when you say it that way.
yeah, sure.
Are you farther along with JavaScript now than you were half an hour ago in making sense of it?
Concepts make sense.
Okay. Sure.
I just can't ever get to where, no, I don't know how to come up with the instructions. It's just.
Here's how you come up with them.
The brain doesn't work that way.
So, again, here's how your brain works. Write out what you need to do.
I literally just did that.
That's called pseudocode, right? On click, I need it to open and close. That's what I need, write it down. Once I do that and I've successfully made it open and close, in testing, I've discovered that if it's closed, once it's beyond a certain width, I need it to open again. You write that down. So therefore, I need to write that. If it's less than 801, hide it. If it's greater, show it. That's then the core of it. We then have to surround that with more specifics. So it's the core thing that then you write instructions around it to perform the task. But it's the core things that you just write out. If you can, but you understand what I'm saying, right? I need it to open and close. So I just click open and close. Now when I close it, it breaks.
That's literally what I just did, like 10 minutes ago. I have to confess it's for PHP, but
Whatever.
like I just write the words that I need, like class, variable, 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 function, function, function. The words I need first, and then I have no idea how to do my PHP homework, so I'm doing that instead.
But this is how you start. That's called pseudocode. That then you have to write it as real code. The conditional structure is the basic of it all. Then do that. Else, don't do this, or else do something else. For these, write those, right? Anyhow,
Let's do something else.
Huh?
That was good.
so here's what I'm saying, right? I encourage all of you to write your own damn jQuery and start writing your own jQuery for stuff like this instead of, right, Seth?
Yep.
Sorry, I mentioned you by name.
I didn't know if you were pointing at me or
No, I
what.
was pointing at Seth. Write your own damn jQuery to do a toggle menu is my point. Because that's how easy it is. And that's what you're going to need then later on to do something like, well, what if it's as complex as this? Where I have submenus that have to.
It might just be the same thing, just different. You're calling it different stuff.
So it is the same thing at the core with what?
Your script.
Oops, I needed to share. Sorry, people at home didn't see that. So this is that same core concept, except with more what, Seth?
More elements.
With more what? Starts with an I. There's an N in there, and instructions.
More
Slide toggle. If less than 801, hide. Else, show. Or remove class, show, add class, show. It's just adding to it. It's coming up with that core thing and adding more instructions and efficiently writing them and taking duplicate instructions and making them into one nicer set. But it's essentially, what do I want this to do? You write it out, like Nico did. And you write the instructions to do it. Along, and I'll let you go after this, right? But, you guys laughing? Laughing with me? Okay. A long time ago, when I heard the programming is just a set of instructions, ha 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 ha, you can't, look at all that, that's so complex. Ooh. Have you looked at code? It is a set of very mundane, detailed instructions for every scenario. Every last scenario needs an instruction. If I do this, I need an instruction to do next. Do I go this way? Do I do this? Do I do this? You put your right foot in, what do? You take it out, right foot out. When do I shake it all out? 3 times?
When you're instructed to. Yeah.
You put your right foot in, right foot out, right foot in. It's 2, right foot out, right foot in. Then you shake it out about. So after the 3rd time you put your right foot in, you shake it all out. Once I realized that, oh my God, it's easy. You just got to right there. You got to break it down into those individual little things. If I put my right foot in for the 3rd time, it does something different.
It's weird too, because eventually you realize that you're just accessing instructions on Google, and then you're not necessarily copying and pasting, but you're looking at the instructions and copying the instructions and adding your own custom things.
Or I'd like to say you're looking at these instructions for inspiration and influence
Yes.
and to what to do, and then you're writing them yourself.
It's, yeah,
So you become a better programmer.
you do, but it's like you still, you
Yeah,
have to
I know what you're saying.
you have to have the instructions in front of you,
Mhm.
and you create your own version of the instructions.
There's no way that I could write this off the top of my head, Star. What's this?
Nope. Wait, go back to your code.
Hold on. I have to give you guys my parade wave.
No, I mean like.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.